Welcome, everybody. I know that we're competing with an unbelievably beautiful spring day, the first one of the year, so I thank you all for turning out today. Of course, most of you know who I am, but I'm Rob Jensen, the director of the School of Art and Visual Studies, and we're hosting this exhibition, Pass Forward, from the United Arab Emirates, and this panel discussion today is part of that exhibition. Before I turn the panel over and the proceedings over to my colleague, Dr. Miriam Kienle, I wanted to just say a few things about how extraordinary it is, this thing that we're doing, and also how symbolic it is to have this part of the event here in the UK Healthcare Auditorium. And that's because, of course, as you all know, today American politicians have a way of talking about the arts as something that is unimportant and a luxury. This is a reminder that through things like the Arts in Healing program, which is a pioneering program here at UK, that arts do matter at times that are really essential to people's lives. They've done an extraordinary job here. And the exhibition itself is also a reminder of that because it speaks to the value of arts in bridging across cultures, across nations. And it's been an extraordinary event to have these folks here. And I hope that all of you enjoy what happens today. But before I go any further and turn it over to Miriam, I just wanted to recognize one of our most distinguished guests here, which is His Excellency Maitha Al Mehairbi, right? I got that right? Who is the Consul General in New York, who represents the UAE. So we're really pleased to have him here. He's a scientist and represents the UAE, has represented the UAE at for things like climate change. It's very important things that are of interest to us and are interest to the UAE. So welcome everybody, and I hope you enjoy the panel discussion. Miriam?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? So welcome everyone, and welcome to our guests. We're so pleased to have you here today for a discussion. I'm Miriam Kienle. I teach contemporary art history in the School of Art and Visual Studies. So I'm pleased to have our guests here from the Pass Forward exhibition, which is on view. It's going to be opening on April 16th in the School of Art and Visual Studies Gallery on Bolivar Street. So please do come and see the exhibition. It has 50 works by 25 Emirati artists. It's a beautiful, absolutely beautiful exhibition. And we're pleased to have a couple of the artists with us here, as well as two of the co-organizers. So I'll just briefly introduce everyone on the panel before we begin our discussion. So to my right is Dana Al Marashi, the head of the UAE Embassy and Heritage and Social Affairs Department. Terry Harvey, who is the Vice President of Cultural Programs at the Meridian Group, as well as a co-curator for the exhibition. Lamya Gargash, who is one of the artists in the exhibit, as well as Maitha Al Mehairbi, who is another artist, and we'll be talking about their work today. We've brought some images and videos of their work. So perhaps to begin, Terry, you could introduce the exhibition for us and discuss how it came together, and then maybe we'll move to Dana, and she can address the cultural diplomacy aspect of it, as well as what's unique about the partnership between the Embassy and Meridian.
Okay, thank you. Meridian International Center, we're a nonprofit organization devoted to public diplomacy, and in the case of my group, I head the Meridian Center for Cultural Diplomacy. And we help foreign governments and the State Department tell stories to either Americans about foreign countries to help educate them, help them become better international citizens. We also send and export American art abroad to work with embassies and consulates. In the case of Pass Forward, this is quite a unique undertaking. We had known the UAE Embassy for a couple of years prior to taking this on. But in working with them, we learned that they were having a hard time telling their story to Americans, and that Americans tended to maybe lump them together with some of the other Gulf countries. Obviously, the UAE is very rich in their own tradition and their own history, and Pass Forward is sort of a glimpse on how contemporary artists have maintained their heritage and their identity through art. So it's a compelling story. We're quite proud of it. This is the sixth stop along its tour, or seventh, including Washington, D.C., Went to Dallas-Fort Worth, Los Angeles, Spokane, Washington, East Lansing, Michigan, Michigan State University, followed by Chicago, and now Kentucky. And throughout the process, we have included delegations to enjoy educational programming, public speaking opportunities, workshops, and the like. So it is a two-way exchange and quite unique in terms of exhibiting contemporary art in the U.S.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us here today. I'm extremely excited to be talking to you a little bit about my country, the United Arab Emirates, and share a little bit about our rich culture and heritage. When people think of the UAE, they think of tall skyscrapers or five-star hotels. But that isn't what comes to mind when I think of home. For me, it's about believing that anything is possible. Our leaders are true visionaries, and it is through their vision and guidance that the UAE has become the country that it is today. We have over 200 nationalities living there. Generations of people from around the world have made the UAE their home. Growing up, this was such a unique experience, and I feel blessed. We're proud to be an open and tolerant country in a region of instability. The US and the UAE enjoy a strong bilateral relationship in areas such as trade, defense, and education. And as I travel around the US and visit cities such as Joplin, Missouri, Tuscaloosa, Alabama, Spokane, Washington, Los Angeles, California, I'm reminded that our values are closely aligned. Allow me to share a brief example with you. In 2011, the UAE Embassy partnered with Philadelphia Independence, and we took part in a women's soccer league program where we had our Emirati players come over to Pennsylvania, Malvern, Pennsylvania, for a 3-week tour where they got to participate in scrimmages with some of the local schools. And I remember before the players came out, I was talking to some of the American soccer players, and they were all very nervous. They didn't know how to react to the girls, or what they had to, how to act in front of them, or what to talk to them about. And I was like, just meet with them, have conversations, and, we'll take it from there. And I remember after the program, the girls came up to me and they were like, wow, we didn't realize that we were so similar to each other. And that's what I'd like to try embodying as we continue doing projects around the United States, is to focus on the similarities that we have between our two cultures. Creating new friendships and relationships is critical to the success of Pass Forward. Right from the start, this project was a partnership between the United States through Meridian International Center and the UAE through the Embassy of the United Arab Emirates. It all started with a road trip. We were in a van traveling around the UAE, meeting with artists such as Lamya and Maitha Al Mehairbi. We met with galleries, collectors, cultural institutions, and it was a chance for our American friends to really understand the country's rich culture and heritage. This exhibition represents a number of firsts for the Embassy and the United States. It is the first ever major touring exhibition of Emirati art abroad. It is the first time that the story of the UAE has been told through art. And it is the UAE Embassy's first cultural diplomacy program here in the United States. UAE residents and visitors no longer need to travel to places such as Paris or New York. Several national initiatives have been launched to preserve and promote the UAE's art and culture. In Sharjah, visitors can experience the Sharjah Biennial and visit over a dozen museums. In 1998, UNESCO designated the Emirate as the cultural capital of the Arab region. Abu Dhabi has the new Saadiyat Culture District, where we're going to be housing the Louvre Abu Dhabi and the Guggenheim Museum from New York. In Dubai, we're going to be having the new Modern Art Museum and the Opera House District. I can't wait for all these institutions to open and get to experience, these amazing institutions firsthand in my country. As I've traveled around the United States with this exhibition, we've had a chance to meet with kids from elementary school students all the way up to university students. And I've just been so amazed and thrilled at their enthusiasm, the questions that they ask, the thirst for knowledge of actually learning about a new culture. And I think that's what's made this project so successful as we've traveled around the United States, from going to a rodeo in Texas or visiting a reservation in Spokane, Washington. So I'd like you to take the chance of taking a visual journey across the United Arab Emirates by visiting this exhibition. And I'd also like to thank His Excellency Majid Al-Suwaidi, who is here visiting us from New York to promote and help talk to you about the United Arab Emirates and our close relationship with the United States. And of course, none of this would be possible without our very talented artists. Thank you.
So maybe we'll turn to Lamya and Maitha. Would you maybe introduce your work for our audience, briefly describe maybe some of the themes of your work, and we'll pull up an image and
Sure.
we can discuss more in depth.
Is my mic working?
I think
Yeah,
so.
okay.
Yes.
Hi everyone, my name is Lamya Gargash and I'm a visual artist from the UAE. I have a background degree in visual communications and an MA degree in communication design, photography. So photography for the last decade has been my forte. I'm a traditional photographer, which means I still work with film and processing and old techniques. A lot of the work that I do is exploration of homes and spaces and interiors. And the idea is that I would like to somehow express cultural change in space. And by spaces, I mean spaces that are based back home. I'm intrigued by Emirati homes. I'm intrigued by composition. I'm intrigued by showcasing the idea of a human experience and human storytelling and human traces without actually having them embodied in my work. And it's been a decade's worth of work. So I've done everything from old community theaters to budget hotels to private bedrooms and social clubs. And so I have a wide variety of work, but they all kind of they're all linear in terms of a subject. I believe that, well, for me it was a matter of, I was studying and I came back home and I was very curious about why. I guess when you're in the change, you don't notice how fast things evolve and how fast things move, but then when you're away for some time and you come back and you notice that, oh, where did this house go and where did this building sprout from? And I think that's where the idea started with me, is that I felt that I needed to preserve a culture that I knew, which was culture of the 80s and the early 90s. And so I started my documentation process starting with my old house. And then I also, so that was the initial drive to the work. So I published my book in 2008. It was my thesis study, and it was called Presence. And the idea was it talked about human presence in these spaces without actually having any human traces in them. So I'm inspired by a lot of photographers such as Stephen Shore and Candida Hofer, and they all work with the idea of composition and architecture of space. So for me, these are personal bodies of work. I find myself almost in a trance when I shoot them. I like the idea of documenting the overlooked and the mundane, because I find that there's a lot of beauty around us that we tend to overlook because of the change around us. And a lot of the spaces that I document do feel like you're flown back in time, because even though they're around 20, 25, 30 years of age, you do feel a sense of, a strong sense of change once in them. You do feel like you're almost detached from the exterior. So that's the work that I do. But I also do video. I do illustration on the side. I never limit myself in terms of the art. If I feel strongly connected to an idea, then I'll try and associate that with a medium that I like. But photography has been kind of a constant medium that I've been developing over the years. And that's it, I guess.
Thank you. Maitha, would you like to?
So my name is Maitha Al Mehairbi. I'm a mixed media artist. I use a variety of mediums, so I do illustrations, paintings, and I also love to work with videography, so I do a lot of video installations as well. Because I also work as a researcher, I feel that my work as a researcher and as an artist, both these practices kind of inform each other. So I base a lot of work on research and then sort of take it from there, and it sort of seeps into that, and they influence each other. And I'm specifically interested in identity politics, and as a person that I've grown up in a very traditional household. Both my parents come from tribal backgrounds, and sort of growing up with that and sort of negotiating my identity in the modern UAE and being caught in this kind of interesting cultural limbo, it like really informs the kind of work that I'd like to do.
That's a great actually lead in to my next question, which a number of you have touched on, but Donna, Lamya, or Maitha, can you sort of set the context for the emergence of the contemporary art scene in the UAE, and maybe the effect that that's had on your work?
I think that specifically us, we come from, I would say that the actual exhibition represents 3 different generations of artists, so it's really interesting to kind of see that evolution and us coming in and sort of trying to find our place. And I think it's kind of a reoccurring theme with several of us, specifically in regards to kind of like this fast-paced change and this idea of nostalgia, but also being very self-aware in our nostalgia, that it almost becomes, us treating as nostalgia of it on itself as a thing of its own.
Would you like to elaborate?
I was approached by my gallery back in 2004, just before I went off for my degree in England. And when they asked when they asked to represent me, I had no idea what representation meant at that point. I just thought, okay, this sounded really cool. And yes, I'd like to be part of your family of artists. And a few years later, I did the Venice Biennale. So I have seen, I've been in the change. I've seen it grow. And then a few years later, I was asked to do the Venice Biennale. And so from not knowing what representation meant to actually participating in such an amazing event such as the Venice Biennale was, for me, I look back and I think, wow, that's quite a jump. And so yes, I've noticed the change. I always tell people this when people ask me what I do. I mean, back in the day, I'd be like artist or a photographer or a visual artist. I get a pity pat on the back, and then if my sister, I love my sister. She works for the embassy, and so she gets a lot of praise. So she's always up on a pedestal, and I'm like, and then they'll be like, we have weddings. Maybe you can come take some pictures of the bride and groom and things like that. So a lot of the time, not that there's anything wrong with being a wedding photographer, but I've just I've seen the change happen, and I've seen how people now the appreciation and acknowledgement of art and the not inspiration, but the yearning for knowledge as well. So that's how I see change.
And I think art is something that's very much a part of our society. I mean, it's represented all over. You have a lot of public art displays, a lot of galleries that are embedded within kind of business centers or financial districts. So art is something that's very close to our heart, and we try ensuring that through art we're able to tell the story of the kind of development of the country and of the values of us and the people of the country as well.
And following up on that, Lamya, your work, actually maybe I'll just click back to the slide. It really engages this transformation of the UAE into a global hub through the kind of changing architectural landscape, particularly these intimate spaces. As you were talking about your work, you started to touch on this, but I wonder if you might elaborate how globalization and development in the UAE is addressed in your work.
When I first started my documentation, I remember asking a few family members on why because there came a point when I saw that a lot of my family members and friends were moving away from my neighborhood, and they told me, well, my house is so old, it's 20 years old, and it's time to move. And I think that idea for me was it was almost like an eye-opener, because I then started to compare ideas of age in a kind of an international sense and age with us. But then, we've evolved so fast that 20 years is a long time. You do actually notice a huge change. And so I felt a desire to document that change. And I would go around and I would talk to a lot of individuals in the process of moving or who've abandoned their homes, and I would ask them for permission to shoot their homes and spaces, because it felt like there was a desire to document that particular time. When I talk about history that I grew up in, I'm not really referring to a really old history, 50, 100 years or 60 years. I'm referring to kind of the history that I grew up in and the memories that that overlapped my life. And so it felt almost like a duty on my end to at least try and document change. Because I believe that when you change a space, you change the way people interact and the way people socialize and communicate and engage. Spaces had less formal etiquettes in the past than they did now. So that in return changes the way we connect with each other as well.
Maybe elaborating on that a little bit, either one of you could answer, Maitha or Lamya, like what sorts of stories or customs your parents or grandparents shared with you while you were growing up, and maybe how these might influence your work. Actually, I think, Maitha, this might work well with the video clip. Do you want to play maybe the video clip?
Sure.
Quickly? Okay. So we have a short snippet from the video that's longer that you can see in the gallery.
لبست يديك وتمثلت بعينيك وارتديت أساور كانت لك.
Well, particularly in this video, which is showing at the exhibition, I think the story was literally my mom had a trunk full of items, things that she collected, and there was such a stark like age gap between me and my older siblings. So she kind of, they were all born in the 70s, and very early on, and the UAE was established in 71. So they were part of that generation, and they sort of kind of grew up together. And by the time I came, which was like there's like a 12-year age difference between me and my oldest siblings. And to kind of have her collect all these memories and me not being part of it, but sort of feeling like I'm part of it, there was a kind of sense of, nostalgia for something that you weren't even part of. Like you're nostalgic for a memory that you didn't even live. And to come to terms with that, what I tried to do is sort of insert myself in these memories and sort of travel through her belongings and trying to find something that I can hold on to. And sort of, there's something very, I guess, sad about it, but there's also something that kind of releases you as well. And
That's interesting. And your work is influenced, it sort of has an anthropological element to it. Actually, a number of the artists in the show's work is very interdisciplinary. I wonder if either of you might want to address how many of the artists they come from backgrounds in science or mathematics or engineering, and this sort of maybe multidisciplinary aspect of either of your practices?
I think Lamya touched on it a little bit, which is kind of this idea of maybe art when it's still very young in a very young country is to kind of regard it as a full-time career was not something that was part of the beginning of the art scene. So you end up a lot with an older generation of artists that were in a sense doing art as a part-time thing, and it ends up actually becoming interesting of its own, because what you end up doing is sort of merging these different worlds together, and I think that's part of the very interesting story of seeing art start from scratch and sort of progressing that way.
My dad still tells people I'm an interior designer. Or sometimes if we're at a jewelry exhibition, he'll tell them I'm a jewelry designer, and he hands out my business cards. I'm like, so it's interesting. I find it very interesting when he decides to kind of delve into my world and he tries to show his appreciation. And I'm like, I'm not really an interior designer, but I do appreciate composition. So I mean, but I've always been fond of people who were into sciences and maths, because I was never good at maths. But But I do understand, I do appreciate art being a full-time job because it really does involve a lot of research. At least on my end, my work recently has been very conceptual. So I do a lot of research prior to my work. I love to read and I love to ask people questions. So I think that art, I mean, photography is an extension of painting, and there are a lot of scientific aspects in relation to photography, paintings and colors and mathematics. So if you look at it in general, we are actually kind of like a pool of different skills. And and getting your idea across is not as easy as it sounds. I suffered for a very long time from diversion. I would go off on different tangents, and for me to actually be grounded and to be clear about my message was, I think, the hardest task.
Well, I think the work is very evocative and tells stories really well. Actually, one of the things that we had talked about, Donna, was that how many of the artists from the UAE and many of the artists in the exhibition are really excellent storytellers. And so I wonder if you might elaborate about what about Emirati culture, right?
So, I mean, we grew up at a time that, we didn't really have very much. So we were very strong. We were always very strong storytellers. Oral traditions was something that was extremely important. It was stories that were passed down from generation to generation. Poetry is also something that's very close to the Emirati culture. And I think it was, at the time when we didn't have ways of writing down, not a lot of people were educated. They weren't schools back then, and so that was a way of us being able to kind of pass down stories. It was through oral traditions, being able to hear stories from our ancestors, about the pearl diving days, or about the agriculture, or the desert life. It was all done through storytelling. And so I think that's why a lot of us, and different pieces within the exhibition talks about kind of the oral element of the culture.
Interesting. And Terry, I wonder, in researching the exhibition, were there aspects of the culture that really struck you, of the local or regional culture that stood out?
Absolutely. I had the privilege, she mentioned earlier, we had this great road trip across, I guess, 6 of the 7 Emirates. And I guess the most alarming thing that I learned, in a good way, was the level at which foundations and local leaders place arts and performing arts as a legitimate profession to go into. You had mentioned earlier that perhaps maybe the older generations didn't have that luxury. But nowadays, you cannot walk through a business district without seeing commercial gallery spaces with open doors doing free parties. I think the Village Gate that I always mention, Gate Village, down there in Dubai, which is the financial hub, they have what's the first Friday of every month is an art all night type of event where all the galleries open, and it's highly attended. Whereas if you were to say go to the Hirshhorn in DC, it might not be as crowded as it should be. I would say what I learned out of this was the level at which they really consider art as an important element of their culture. And I was surprised by the art being produced there. It really is at a world-class level. And I think the rich history of oral traditions really does come through in their artworks.
And with the exhibition, actually, maybe either of you might answer this question. With the exhibition, what kinds of, as it travels through the U.S., what kinds of assumptions do you think are maybe changed by the exhibit and the other initiatives that are around the exhibit?
I think people are, I think the programming element is what makes this exhibition very unique. We're able to go and talk to school children, have the school children come over to the gallery and actually get to experience the work and ask questions. And I think, the children understand. The people start realizing the similarities between the two cultures. They start realizing that, women play a very active role. So we have, an almost equal representation of both male and female artists in this exhibition. And I think it was just a better understanding of the values, that we find that is important to be able to kind of hold on to our culture, the nostalgia, so people kind of relate to that. I mean, people were looking at Maitha's work in Los Angeles, and they came and they spoke about they had tears in their eyes because they're talking about how they can remember their childhood and the nostalgia that they had there. So I think a lot of people, when they view the art, they can relate to it. And I think that's what the beauty of art is that you don't have to be able to speak the same language, because through art you're able to kind of break down cultural barriers and be able to learn about a new culture through something as beautiful as art.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think echoing that, I think the real impact is education, and it's everyone has an idea of what they think someone is. Unfortunately, we sort of live in a society that you have these misconceptions, and I think through education you begin to open your mind a little bit about, hey, well, those people are just like us. They share the same values. UAE is incredibly progressive with gender equality, with artistic production. They really are an excellent model in many different sectors, not just culture. So I think also the two-way exchange cannot be understated. Even for Donna, you've been around this country a lot, but I imagine every stop you make, you learn a little bit more about America. And for all the great artists that join these trips, it's really quite special to send them home with a new appreciation of America too.
Yeah, I was actually really struck. You brought up Maitha's work with the trunk, how it evoked for me like a hope chest kind of, or my mother had a chest like that with heirlooms and things that she put in there, and how there are these similarities that these connections and a desire to connect maybe to that past, even though it really, many of the objects in that chest don't really relate to my contemporary experience.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was actually one of the things I was worried about, and I think participating in this exhibition kind of really opened my eyes to the universality of these themes, and to actually have these reactions really struck me. I was pleasantly surprised to have these kinds of reactions from people that said, actually, this makes sense to me.
Yeah, maybe both of you could elaborate on that observation about this being part of the delegation and coming to Lexington and traveling. How, what are the sort of cross-cultural experiences that maybe stand out to you that you've had during your trip? Or
Took us 16 hours to get here.
But
We made it. I think what's amazing is that we had preconceived notions of what people expected of us. So we assumed that there would be a lot of explanation that we had to do, and maybe a lot of questions that we needed to answer. And we were really, really surprised to see kids as young as 7 and 8 had, their background information, and they were really enthusiastic, and they knew a lot. So I feel like we actually, the experience we got in return was that, we just felt that
we expected a lot more,
maybe
facepalm moments.
Yes.
And we were actually really surprised that not just the level of knowledge, but the level of genuine curiosity
and
to
enthusiasm
know, and
as well. Enthusiasm.
Yeah.
They were really smart, and the workshops that we had were about engaging, having them to engage with the art and be a bit more. They were challenging. I think some of them, but they were reciprocated well, and they were really excited about putting forth their ideas and their visions, and it was just. I felt really warm about it. It was really nice.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, yesterday I think I overheard you saying that, everybody has been really warm and welcoming in the U.S.,
it was
in New York, but especially in Kentucky. It's
I called my mother and I told her exactly how I was like, they're so hospitable. I told her I don't even want to go home. But it's just, Arabs are known for hospitality as well, so I feel like there was that connection as well, because you do feel like you're home, because everyone is so nice and everyone is so generous.
There's
and
a genuine appreciation for people that kind of show that sense of hospitality. It really kind of almost brings you to tears to kind of say.
And they actually approach you and they shake your hands, and I feel like, wow, I feel so special. But it's just, again, that connection, I feel is quite strong. Hospitality and just being very generous. And So that was beautiful.
So glad you've had such a warm
Yeah.
welcome. And I kind of heard you, Donna, did you want to add anything about sort of what you might bring back from your experience with the exhibition?
I mean, this exhibition is just, every stop that we've had has been great, but I feel like Lexington really was the perfect end to the tour in terms of the number of programming. Everyone's just been so welcoming, and they've just been so thirsty for knowledge, just wanting to make us feel as comfortable as possible in the community, people coming up and talking to us. So it's just been a high note to the end of the tour.
Oh, yes.
Wonderful.
I think we have a few more minutes before we'll open it up to question and answer, but from the audience. But maybe elaborating a little bit more about the art scene in the UAE and the kinds of opportunities that are there. I mean, you said going from not knowing what representation was to the Venice Biennial, which is this sort of most prominent, maybe global forum for
It was.
art. Yeah.
It was. I was 26 years old, and I, again, not really understand. I mean, I was still very new to the gallery as well, and I remember I had met the curator, and they were like, "Come in, you need to meet this guy." And I was like, "Oh, okay, do I have to?" I was like, I was working, and I was on the female soccer team, so I was like, I've got soccer at 6, right? So I need to go. So then I went in and I talked to him, and I was like, "Okay, this is my work, and this is what I did." And then she's like, "This is the curator for the biennial," and I was like, okay. So, I mean, but again, that instant connection, the idea that I've gone from having no knowledge at all to meeting the curator and participating in all these really grand events.
Yes.
And then there's so many events happening as well, coinciding. You've got the fairs, you've got workshops, you've got, and even with my degree, I applied for a scholarship, and I was the first person to apply for a degree in an MFA, a scholarship for an arts program. So they interrogated me heavily. And then 3 years down the line, they contacted me again and asked me if I wanted a degree in performance arts, and it's like, wow. So I've actually seen the change firsthand. I've seen it go from, being questioned, and then it really, embracing it. And there's so much to do back home that you actually have no time to attend, but it's great to see the vibe and the energy of the art.
Do you want to elaborate on that vibrancy that?
I mean, yeah, you're almost actually spoiled for choice back home with the amount of opportunities, not just to exhibit, but fellowships and whatnot. So I was, last year, I was part of the Sadama Foundation Emerging Artist Fellowship, which is done in cooperation with the Rhode Island School of Design. And to kind of have the ability to be, completely 100% sponsored, to take courses at RISD, to have access to workshop spaces, and to kind of be able to network and meet all these different artists. So we've met a lot of artists when we were with the RISD school, and we went to several workshops, and just to kind of have all these opportunities that really kind of, such as this one, really, and to kind of be able to put our work out there, but also to kind of get the opportunity to learn and grow as well. So there's fertile ground there for this sort of thing.
Well, maybe we'll open up to the audience.